Cartels are a dog-eat-dog world. It's as easy to climb the ranks as it is to fall all the way to the bottom. In El Guaro Palma's case, the fall was so steep there was no way back up. After a falling out with his old cartel, El Guaro received his wife's head in a box. Then, he watched the brutal murder of his 2 children. El Guaro wanted blood. He embarked on an outrageous revenge mission until he was finally captured. But even then, the tragedy didn't end. Trigger warning. In this case, we'll be discussing extreme violence, death, and young children. This is your chance to turn back. This is the full story of how smuggling destroyed El Guardo's life. El Guardo was born Hector Luis Palma Salazar on April 29, 1960 in Sinaloa, Mexico. That's right. Sinaloa is the Mexican state that saw the birth of the notorious, infamous cartel. But back when El Guardo started a life of crime, the Sinaloa cartel didn't exist. Like many people in that place and time, El Guardo turned to illegal work as a means to make quick cash. He was born into a poor family and was desperate to have a better life. So shortly after finishing primary school, Hector quit his education and started stealing cars. It wasn't honorable, but it made big bucks compared to any other menial job. However, there are many ranks to climb in the illegal working world, and El Guardo wasn't going to be a car thief forever. By his late teens, he was hired as a gunman for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, aka El Padrino, the founder of the notorious Guadalajara cartel, the first of many powerful Mexican cartels. El Guardo thus grew inside the Guadalajara cartel, with the cartel itself. In the 1970s, Gallardo became the single largest smuggler of reefer and white powder. Meanwhile, El Guardo was promoted to sicario, to smuggler, to chief of logistics for the entry of heavy shipments. He had gone from poor boy to a rich chief smuggler by the time he was 20, but this would come at a huge cost. Cartel bosses are notoriously unforgiving when it comes to mistakes. That way they set a tough example for anyone else and rule by fear. El Guardo was working together with none other than El Chapo at the time. He too was climbing the ranks of the Guadalajara cartel, and he would go on to form the ruthless Sinaloa cartel after El Padrino's arrest. But El Guardo had a third partner, Abayardo El Bolito Radamosa, and one day, El Guardo and El Bolito couldn't resist the temptation to keep a cargo, or they lost one, whichever story you believe. But this shipment was worth millions of dollars, and the cartel was very strict when it came to doing as your bosses told you. When the Arellano Felix brothers found out, they executed El Bolito on the spot. El Guardo survived the attack, but he could never convince his bosses of his innocence. Benjamin and Ramon Arellano Felix tried to persuade their cousin, El Padrino, to decrease of El Guardo's power within the cartel. But El Guardo's discipline and his collaboration with El Chapo made El Padrino think again. However, it was exactly El Guardo's power and connections that ultimately led to his arrest in 1978. In 1978, El Guardo was arrested by the DEA in Arizona and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Shortly after he got out, El Padrino was finally arrested. The Guadalajara cartel came to an end, but it wouldn't be without a bang. The Guadalajara cartel was massive, so it split into smaller factions. Some of these spread a rumor that El Chapo and El Guardo plotted to bring El Padrino down. By 1989, there was an all-out war with El Guardo and El Chapo against the Arellano Felix brothers. This is better known as the drug war between the Sinaloa and the Tijuana cartels. Of course, they weren't just fighting over principle. They both wanted control over the Sonora region, which is a must for smuggling into the US. But the Arellano Felix brothers never forgave El Guardo for the lost shipment back in the 1970s, so there was a personal vendetta here as well. The Arellano Felix brothers hired a Venezuelan man called Rafael Cabell Moreno. He was said to be handsome and mysterious with great flirting skills. Initially, Moreno was supposed to seduce El Guardo's sister, but the mission got much darker on the way. Through El Guardo's sister, Moreno befriended his wife, Guadalupe Leja. Guadalupe had 2 young children to take care of, but it had been a long time since she'd felt admired and desired. El Guardo spent most of his time overseeing sketchy deals and bribing officials. He had no time for romantic love. So when Moreno came along, Guadalupe was very susceptible to charm. Within 2 weeks, she was ready to start a new life with him. They ran off to San Francisco, and Moreno convinced her to take out $7 million from the family's San Diego account. When El Guardo realized what was going on, he had a jealous rage and destroyed every valuable in their home. But he didn't yet understand the true horror of the situation. Soon after Guadalupe arrived at the San Francisco hotel, Moreno cut her throat, then he beheaded her and preserved her head in a cooler. He would send it to El Guardo. 15 days later, Moreno took El Guardo's 2 children, 5-year-old Hector Jesus and 4-year-old Natalie, to San Cristobal, Venezuela, on top of the Concordia Bridge. He threw the 2 children off the bridge and filmed everything so that their father could watch. Imagine receiving your wife's head and a tape of your children's murders as a gift from the cartel. This was the end of El Guardo as far as he was concerned. He didn't care what happened next. He just wanted revenge. First, he had Moreno's 3 children assassinated. Then, he had Moreno arrested and paid someone to kill him while in prison. But it didn't end there.
It is also attributed to El Guardo the murders of Rafael Clavel's lawyer, Jesus Schemes, of 9 Arellano family members, of the activist for the defense of human rights, Norma Corona Salazar, and 3 students of Venezuelan nationality registered in the Autonomous University of Sinaloa.
On November 8, 1992, El Guardo also ordered a bloody attack on the Jalisco nightclub, where he believed the Arellano Felix brothers to be that night. 10 people died, but Benjamin and Ramon escaped. In May of the next year, El Guardo also ordered the shooting of Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo. He was found dead in his car at the Guadalajara airport. El Guardo was helped in his revenge quest by El Chapo and El Mayo. The 3 of them were the founders of the Sinaloa cartel. Within a few years, Ramon Arellano Felix would be dead, and his brother Benjamin would be in prison. The Tijuana cartel would become small and insignificant compared to the mighty Sinaloa cartel. But El Guardo's time in the spotlight would end pretty soon. Amidst his bloody quest, El Guardo tried to honor the deaths of his children and his wife. He commissioned a painting that depicted his family as angels, and he built a mausoleum in Humaya, Culiacan. But do these Christian efforts balance out the pain, suffering, and bloodshed spread to the cartel and their families? In the eyes of the authorities, the answer was no. By the mid-1990s, El Guardo was a wanted man in Mexico. In 1993, El Chapo was arrested for the first time. For El Guardo, this came with a silver lining. He would gain even more power within the Sinaloa cartel. Now, El Guardo was a co-ruler of the cartel, alongside El Mayo. He wore snakeskin boots and drove everywhere with 7 sicarios and 33 police officers. He had his own diamond-encrusted gold pistol. He felt invincible. He had emerged victorious from a bloody war that destroyed his family. But nothing lasts forever, and the highs of cartel life are always short-lived. The higher you are in the pyramid, the more enemies you make, including the police. Remember how many people El Guardo maimed and killed in the early 1990s? He wasn't going to be free forever. On June 22nd, 1995, El Guardo was on a private plane on his way to a wedding, but the pilot went off route and lost precious gas in the process. The plane crashed into the mountains between the states of Nayarit and Jalisco. Enraged and used to getting things his way, El Guardo killed the pilot and co-pilot and stuffed their bodies into sleeping bags. He found a hideout where he can recover from his injuries and wait for his army to rescue him. But the Mexican army got there first. They identified and arrested him on the spot. El Guardo was sentenced to 7 years for possession of cocaine. He was sent to a maximum security prison in Puente Grande, Jalisco, where he had the opportunity to meet again with his old partner, El Chapo. El Chapo escaped Puente Grande in 2001. El Guardo was supposed to be released the following year, but he would never walk free again. In 2002, an arrest warrant for extradition by the United States would arrive in Mexico. El Guardo couldn't leave Puente Grande until his extradition, so he was their prisoner for 5 more years, until 2007 when he was finally sent to the US. Initially, El Guardo was incarcerated in Phoenix, Arizona prison, but within a year, he was sent to ADX Florence, the United States' highest security prison, which is also where El Chapo is currently serving his life sentence. That's right, El Guardo and El Chapo are once again prison mates, but ADX Florence is not like other prisons. In fact, it has been criticized by human rights activists for violating the most basic rights. Prisoners spend 23 hours a day alone in their concrete walls with just a small black and white TV and radio. Their spare hour is also spent alone, shackled, and heavily supervised by guards. Only during their last year of the Florence Supermax can prisoners interact with fellow inmates and eat together. This might be El Chapo's life forever, but in June 2016, El Guardo was released from prison on good behavior. He was only 56, but he had a very poor vision, missing teeth, and a painful hernia. Yeah, 2 decades in prison never helped anyone's health. Eduardo's story is a tragic one. He sought work in the cartel for some quick cash and ended up intertwined with the most dangerous people in Mexico. Then, he became one of the most dangerous people and suffered horrific consequences. His quest for revenge only brought about more suffering. An eye for an eye only prolongs the pain. At the moment, Eduardo's whereabouts are unknown. Former cartel members famously stay in the shadows after getting released from prison. If they help the authorities in any way, there is serious retaliation danger. Eduardo is now in his early 60s. He still has time to live a peaceful life and try to make up for the damages he's caused. But will he ever be able to move on from the tragedy of his life? Hey, thanks for watching. Let us know what you think about this case in the comments section. And before you go, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons? See you next time.